Join us today as award-winning holistic healthcare practitioner Scott Sommer shares with us his journey in curing his own diagnosis of epilepsy when he was 15 years old. In this episode, we get into how your body is a battery, what your doctor is missing with thyroid, metabolism, and weight loss issues, and the 4 pillars of longevity. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the show. And today's interview, we get to talk to Scott Sommer, and we are going to talk about a bunch of different things. Scott's a award-winning holistic healthcare practitioner, and so we had a great conversation breaking down a whole bunch of topics that I think you guys would be really interested in. So we could look at things, we took it into thyroid and weight loss issues and why it's so individual. We talk about things around the body acting as a battery and what that actually means. How do you charge that battery, and what are the things that are draining that battery? And we get into the 4 pillars of longevity, and we look at what the root cause to most diseases. So it's a really fun conversation. I think you'll really enjoy it. Now, before we get into the episode, I wanted to just address a comment that I saw in the YouTube chat at one point there. So one of the comments was asking me to look more in depth into oils, around the idea of vegetable oils being toxic. So let me just address that here right now. I am very well aware of the rancidity issues of vegetables, and I would actually put chronic consumption of vegetable oils being at probably one of the top reasons for chronic illness to date. So rancid oils are really, really bad for you. For the most part, they are at the root cause for inflammation, oxidative load on the body, a whole bunch of different problems that can come from them. Now, part of this problem is that the industry that even tells you which good oils are, so when we talk about good oils, we think of things that are maybe like flax oil or maybe like olive oil or avocado oil or some of these different vegetable-based oils. Now, part of the problem is that in the processing of these oils, they actually become rancid. So they actually become oxidized. And if you are eating a rancid oil, then you're essentially loading your body with free radicals. So all of these health benefits that we think we're going to get from these oils, we're really not getting them. And a lot of times we're actually getting a lot more problems from them. So what I wanted to address with this was that even though that we know that, and I think one of the studies I looked at just a little while back was saying that about 80% to maybe even up to 90% of commercial grade avocado oil was all rancid. So kind of saying like probably not a good idea to just go to your local market and pick up avocado oil and consume it. I would even go as far as to say for most vegetables, you have to be very particular with the types of oils that you use, and you want to get them from very reputable companies that essentially have testing that takes place on them. So that brings me to the company C60 Purple Power that is using these specific oils. So what they use is they use carrier oils, which are going to be MCT, olive oil, or avocado oil. Those are the 3 main carrier oils that they use to basically provide the carbon 60 or the C60, which is the extremely powerful antioxidant that you've heard me talk about, and you can learn more about by clicking the link below. So I think the question was around be careful with promoting avocado oil with a certain product because avocado oil is dangerous because it's likely rancid. So again, I agree with the fact that most oils are rancid. You have to get good quality oils. If you can get good quality pure oils, there's a ton of health benefits from that. And that's actually been documented very well. There's tons of health benefits to many different oils in the literature. And C60 Purple Power is right at the leading edge of quality assurance. So they use only the highest quality oils. They use 100% certified organic oils. They are healthy, farm fresh, direct carrier oils, and their products are third-party lab tested to make sure that they're pure, they're concentrated properly, and bioavailability. Now, this is really important because that is almost unheard of in this industry. Third-party lab testing is really important. That means that you have a neutral lab that periodically will check your products to ensure that what you say is in there, and that they are of high grade. So when I'm looking at different products, for the most part, that's a really important one for me to make sure that when I'm looking at something, it's actually got in it what it tells me it's got in it. There's been so much confusion in the supplement market. I remember looking at studies on probiotics and finding almost the same thing. They would randomly take 10 different probiotics and look to see if what was in it was actually in it. And 8 to 9 times out of 10, what they said was in there was either dead, or it wasn't viable, or wasn't even in there to begin with. So the supplement industry is not governed in the same way that, say, food and drugs are. So a lot of the companies that are doing really good work often make sure that they have third-party labs to guarantee that what's in their product, that they can stand behind it and is actually there. So I hope that helps. And if you have any questions, please feel free to post a comment for me and I'll do my best to answer them. If you have other topics that you'd like to learn about too, please, again, feel free to post a comment and I'll do my best to try and pull that kind of information together. Now, click the link below if you're interested in C60. They offer 15% off of the individual bottles. If you click the link and use the promo code, all in capitals, Dr. Loken, that's DRLOKEN. You can also click the link on the inspirehealthpodcast.com website. You'll see at the top right corner, 15% off the C60 Purple Power. Okay, everybody, enjoy the show with Scott Sommer and I'll talk to you soon.
Welcome to the Inspire Health Podcast. Your life is about to get a whole lot better. Have you ever felt like you tried everything and yet still couldn't find the answers or the solutions that you were seeking? Whether you're dealing with chronic illness, physical or emotional pain, I want you to know that your body is the most sophisticated machine on planet Earth. Your body holds unfathomable wisdom. Trust in it and learn from it. Know that there are answers and there are solutions to your specific health challenges. And we will be uncovering all of them here on the Inspire Health Podcast. I'm so excited to be a part of your healing journey. Your transformation starts now.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Inspire Health Podcast. And today's guest is Scott Sommer. Scott started his health and healing journey at just 18 months old when he was diagnosed with epilepsy. Scott made a commitment that if he could remove the disease from his own brain, he would spend the rest of his life helping others do the same. As organic farmers at heart, Scott's parents were already strong on the subject of nutrition and provided their son with a diet including healthy fats such as nuts and avocados to help repair the brain. And by 15 years old, Scott was declared healed and free from epilepsy. Scott went on to pursue a degree in chemical engineering and then another degree in Western medicine. Scott became inspired by the power of Chinese medicine, and he pursued a degree in nutrition and a master's degree in Chinese medicine and acupuncture. Now, Scott is an award-winning practitioner treating patients all around the world with his unique techniques, combining his knowledge of both Western and Eastern medicine, where he approaches 100% of the problem to find 100% of the solution. He is able to properly assess the problem and then get to the why of his patients' health problems and ultimately resolve them. He likes to spend his free time traveling in his RV, hiking, working out, biking, and enjoying his family. Scott, what a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Thanks, Jason. Yeah, it's a pleasure. This is exciting.
Yeah, I'm always excited to chat with different people, especially when they've got some experience on blending these different worlds of more conventional Western, more Eastern medicine, because ultimately I think like healing often lies somewhere in the combination of both of them.
Yeah, I agree with that for sure. And that's why I continue to study both, because we really need both, both parts of that. And that's where, China is probably the best example of that, of the blending of, this Asian approach of, a hospital would be the best example in China, where they have different floors, where they do acupuncture on one floor and herbal medicine on another, and surgery on another floor as well. So it's just really the great blend of both worlds.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Scott, I would love to hear a little bit more about your journey in healing epilepsy. And then from there, how you made that transition from chemical engineer to holistic healthcare practitioner.
Yes. Yeah, that's kind of an interesting journey for sure. So basically, my dad was really the greatest influence on me because he was sick as a child as well. And so was my grandfather on my mom's side, my mom's father. And so my dad was really the crusader of all of this. And so he decided when he was 10 years old, he had this bad leg and he had to spend, months at a time in bed. And so, it's just such a debilitating thing for a child, if you can imagine, missing out on fishing. And he was back on Lake Erie, and Cleveland, Ohio is where he grew up. And so he just couldn't do the things he wanted to do. So he had some mentors that he kind of followed, and he just realized that he had to make a difference in his life, a change, to be able to overcome his bad leg. And he had an appendix burst, and he was 10 as well. And that was really the tipping point for him. He realized as he was going to the hospital and going through surgery that, he realized that, Western medicine really saved his life, but he didn't want to spend any more time, another day in the hospital ever from that point forward. So you can imagine, right? As a 10-year-old. So he just started working out. He got interested in, he had a stepfather that was a boxer and, worked out a lot. And he got into farming as well. He was interested in tractors. And so he came to Sacramento to meet his real dad. And he found his dad one day after this, rekindling this relationship. He found his dad dead from a heart attack. So you can imagine the shock that led to, but that shock actually led him to do something about his life. And so he got interested in, once again, bodybuilding. He became Mr. Sacramento, second place. Mm-hmm. It was a pretty big deal. So I was grateful for that, his determination. And he bought a farm, 5 acres, and started farming the land, growing his own food. And that's the farm that I grew up on in, Sacramento. And then I basically was born with epilepsy. And then it was because of my influence on my dad and, eating good food and whole food diet. I didn't have Cheerios and all those Fruit Loops. I didn't, when I see my friends, I was like, I don't even know what that is, colored cereal. Like, we just have brown rice and raisins, And so it was a different experience. And I felt like I grew up like an alien, at first. And I'm totally grateful now looking back. But at the time, it was kind of strange, Mm-hmm. And then, so then finally at age 15, I was, free and clear of epilepsy. And I really related back to a prayer that I said when I was 9, after a doctor told me you'll never have a normal life. And so that's kind of how it all began. And then after I was healed, in the prayer, I said that I promised that I would, after I was healed, that I would help the world, find the cause of their problems. And I prayed for the powers of Superman. And so basically I prayed to find out what was wrong with my brain and find the kryptonite and remove it. Mm-hmm. And so then my quest began at age 15. I'm only 15 years old. Like, what can I do? And so I pursued, herbal medicine, and I went into Chinese herbal stores looking at herbal formulas, in the drawers and making up all the teas, And I just had this dream, this vision of, hey, someday I'm going to be able to put together these teas that'll save somebody's life. And I didn't know how that was going to happen, but so then I started off in chemistry and electrical engineering and chemical engineering because I was so fascinated with science, thinking that this gift that I was developing would be kind of like a hobby. And then I realized that it had to be more than just a hobby. It had to be a way of life for me, a career. And so then I questioned, how will I do that? And so I started studying biochemistry at Davis as a UC Davis student, pre-med student. I decided I would become an MD and then I would jump the fence, right? Seemed like a good plan. And so I, read this book, on alternative medicine and Chinese medicine. And remember this back in the 90s, early 90s. And so I was like, wow, this is kind of crazy. Like I've never heard of this before. And I knew all about nutrition. And so that led to the concept of the body's electric. Mm-hmm. And there really is something beyond what we have here in this country besides herbal medicine and nutrition. So I decided to get a degree in nutrition from Davis. And then I went on to Eastern Medical School. And then I studied kinesiology and iridology. And then the day came when I put all of this together into a package. And here I am 23 years later in practice, seeing patients all over the world. And I feel grateful. And I realized that my journey has really led me to, like you, this integration approach, that we realize that it's just not one tool, right? Mm-hmm. That solves the problem, but it's an integrative approach. Yeah, so that's kind of where I ended up where I am.
That's beautiful. And so many key messages, I think, in that story. So, first, I think a big key message was with your dad is that what really led to the healing was the action that he took to take control of his own life, really, and start to make those changes. I find so often too that Western medicine has a really important part to play with often that initial part when people have, it very much is life-saving medicine, but it runs into troubles, I think, on chronic care management. It's not so great with sort of keeping people healthy, so to speak, right? But when you need to go for certain emergency stuff, that's where it really is life-saving. But I find the chronic care management is where people need to incorporate all of these other aspects of holistic care. So that was one thing that I thought was really important, was that your dad really took it upon himself to make the changes necessary to start to live a really healthy life. And the other part that it was really interesting was your story reminds me a lot of mine. I didn't have epilepsy, but I had chronic allergies and anaphylaxis when I was little. So I remember seeing the allergist back when I was a little kid, and he said, you're the worst kid I've seen in probably 15 years of practice. It's like my entire body was swelling up with every single thing that they touched me with. And so I had my EpiPen and my inhalers and all of that kind of stuff growing up. And it literally was getting worse and worse until I actually first program I did after I was in university, and then I actually went and did registered massage therapy before I did naturopath and osteopathy. But I was at school for registered massage therapy in Canada, and it was there that I ended up seeing a naturopathic physician that actually worked with me, and literally it changed everything because my allergies and everything were just getting worse. And once I got all of the stuff dialed in and started to kind of get corrected, literally it was just disappeared. My seasonal allergies went away. Even my anaphylaxis to a lot of foods, I could actually start to consume again. And so it was dramatic on how much it changed. And it was sort of my personal experience, my personal health journey that really decided where it's like, okay, I got to figure this out because this is really important. The other thing that I think was really important too was from that experience early on, it left me really open to try and figure things out. And I did karate from an early age, and we were so blessed to have an instructor that was pretty open. I remember he would actually get us together, and we would actually do touch for health trainings. He would actually bring someone in. We would do touch for health trainings over the weekends so that we could actually work with each other to make sure everybody was in tip-top shape before we would actually compete. Or if we got injured, we'd be kind of working on each other. I remember like at tournaments in between, you'd be working on each other and muscle testing and checking to make sure everything was all on track. So I think fortunate enough to sometimes have those experiences that open you up to seeing what else is possible.
Absolutely. Yeah, that is so true. Yeah, the possibilities are endless, really. And that's great. Thank you for sharing that story. That's amazing.
Yeah, and you said something really important too about the body being electric. Now, for people that aren't familiar with this is a really important piece of the overall puzzle in my mind too. And likewise, I came across information from people like Dr. Jerry Tennant with Healing is Voltage, and Dr. Becker around the body electric. And maybe you can share a little bit about what you mean by the body as a battery and how that actually plays out.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So, when you think about it, we're like 75% water, so it only makes sense. We have all these electrolytes, and so people don't realize that we're only like 7% blood, but 75% water. So it only makes sense that we are electric, our heart, our brain, and all this electricity. So the way we connect all of these, circuits through these meridians, then so we have a battery with circuits basically. And so all the organs have to communicate with each other. And we know about the nervous system and the blood vessels, but we really kind of, for many years, the Western mind has kind of missed the Asian principle of these electrical connections. And so whether or not we're talking about the basic battery of the mitochondria or the ATP, of the body, it really comes down to a battery. And so we really like little batteries throughout our bodies, and the organs are, like little batteries clustered together to make an organ. And then they have to communicate with each other. And that's why acupuncture works, because we're like switching on these switches that activate, these batteries in these organs.
Nice. So then that kind of opens up the question to, if we function like a battery, then what are the things that actually drain the battery? And what are some of the things that we can do that charge the battery back up?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, just like deflating, when the more you use your cell phone, as an example, the more, more programs and apps you have running, the more it gets drained. So I use that analogy a lot, the cell phone, because we really are like electrically like a cell phone. We get signals that come in. So negative signals, like even emotional, bad relationship or a bad environment, living under a 5G tower or something. Also scars, physically on our bodies affect. We do a lot of scar therapy out of Germany and Russia. And so that's one of the unique things in my clinic that we do of other therapies. And so we know that scars, even from childhood or from a C-section for a woman, you can create insomnia or hormone imbalances, which is where a lot of people have an injury or surgery. And that's another problem, right? So they correct the problem in Western medicine with surgery when it's necessary, but they leave a scar. And so we have to like work together, so emotions, scars, of course, something that's toxic that we take in through toxic food can affect us. Not enough water, toxic water. And so those are the things that deflate or discharge our battery. And the things that charge it up are just the opposite, clean water, clean food, sunshine, getting connected to the earth, earthing, we know when we reconnect as farmers, did, and our ancestors, they were just full of life and vitality. And now, we sit in front of a computer all day and, under a 5G tower, and we're wondering why we're tired by 3 o'clock, And so, but yeah, those are the things that revive us, and positive thinking and positive people and positive environments.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. And for people that might not quite get, like, how does a scar cause your battery to go down? You have to kind of think of it like when you were talking about the meridians. The other thing I think about from the osteopathic side too is that all the meridians relate to different chains of muscles and connective tissue. And what we do know is that a lot of that fascial chain functions like a piezoelectric battery. Or so essentially through the constant movement of it, you literally create a certain amount of voltage or a certain amount of energy from it. And I remember even Dr. Tennant talking about scars being a very high priority. And in osteopathy, scars are also a very high priority to treat first, because in osteopathy, they almost create a separate fulcrum. So everything kind of moves around certain fulcrums in the body, and a scar almost creates an artificial fulcrum. So it starts to create a lot of different problems mechanically in the body. And how Dr. Tennant would talk about is scars literally short circuit that meridian. So when you're testing for it, you'll often see that meridian where the scar crosses shorts it out, and then you start to get the sequelae to what that meridian embodies. So, and the other one you mentioned was emotions, also really important one too. I find that all the time, and a lot of times I even find sometimes emotions precede almost everything, in a lot of times. And I think the other one, I'm not sure if you mentioned that, but hidden infections would be another one that I find. I think when you talked about toxins, probably along the lines of, this is where you might find, say, hidden infections like a root canal that maybe has a hidden infection, or tooth infections or gut infections. Do you find stuff like that often too that shows up?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Especially, yeah, to add to what you just said, that's great. Everything you said is sinuses, are really
Mhm.
ongoing, like the root canal and just cavitational infections. Absolutely. Yeah. So I always say that there's three different reasons why these circuits blow or why we get tired or lose our power is really toxicity, like you mentioned, metals, chemicals, EMFs, and then infections, everything we deal with. A lot of parasites,
Mhm.
are really, really big. We think that we have to go to South America to get parasites or
Yeah.
something, but they come to us, they're just
Yeah.
all
Surprise.
around. Yeah, exactly. And then scars, of course, electrical blocks. So yeah. And I to add what you just said, which was great, was it's like a capacitor, I
Mhm.
believe. It just like discharges this energy, like an electrical storm, and like you said, blocking the flows to the muscle and the yeah, like a fulcrum too. That's makes sense, because it really creates this a new electrical system that's disturbing to the existing electrical system that we were born with,
Yeah,
for sure.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and such a good point. You're always trying to get back to more what we were born with, I think. So much of it is removing the obstacles to that innate healing capacity that we've kind of picked up along the way, whether that's physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, wherever you want to go with it. And the more we can remove that, we just kind of fall back into that place of innate health in my mind.
Yes, that is so true. And that's what I love about kinesiology. You mentioned muscle testing, and It is so true. Like if we really believe that the body has the ability to heal itself, and it does with some help, if you give
Mhm.
it the right tools and the right information, I really believe that we were designed and created to heal, and that's, but when we lose that belief, system, then we're looking for the next new drug and to solve a problem that really should be nutritional based or lifestyle based instead of, drug based.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was a big message, even in the last series we did, was around the importance of really taking taking control of your own life in so many different ways. And I mean, health is no different than any other way that we take control of our health. It's look for guidance, but ultimately the real health comes from the choices that we have to make and start to implement on a regular basis in many ways.
Absolutely. Yep.
One thing I'd like to talk about too is one of the topics that you get into as well is around weight loss, metabolism, and the missing link sort of around what we don't always hear from conventional medicine when it comes to metabolism, weight loss, thyroid. I'd love to hear your perspective on that because this is one that I find many people deal with and is definitely one that is, I feel like only a fraction of it is often covered.
Yeah, sure. No, it's one of my favorite topics for sure. Yeah, thyroid is one of my favorite organs, and I would say that when you think about it, I think of it like a wheel, so the thyroid, if it's the center of the wheel, the hub of a wheel, then basically the spokes are all connected to different organs. So we know the thyroid is the master gland, more or less, besides hypothalamus and pituitary. And so, I think of it like an accelerator on a car or the center of a wheel. And so, if it's going slow, like trying to drive a car, then slow metabolism means that you're not going to burn the calories like you should, or a detox isn't going to happen like it should. So things get backed up. We retain, fat and fat storage and toxins, and then it goes downhill from there. And so that's what people don't want, right? Like we become so efficient at storing fat like a squirrel to nuts. And we're like, man, this is terrible, And you like have this conversation like, stop it, we decided not to do this anymore. So with that said, what I found clinically is that I believe through Asian medicine that the thyroid is always involved, right? It makes sense that, how well your engine runs is always going to be the center. But the missing piece is it a thyroid liver connection? And so I always say that there's this connection, between other organs. So sometimes people have, for instance, thyroid, let's say thyroid blood sugar, pancreas. And so if you have a blood sugar problem, those people are going to be hungry all the time. They're going to wake up like, breakfast is always on their mind when they first get up. Like they can't think about fasting at all. Like it's like the last thing. They're going to get angry, hurt somebody, take a bite out of your arm. And then you've got the other part is like a thyroid liver condition where people are just angry all the time, or they're just having lack of bowel movements if it's liver, gallbladder, and their elimination is just so poor. And then if you dive deeper, it might be a thyroid, bowel trouble, where they have toxic bowel, leaky gut, with parasites or whatever. And then they just can't seem to lose the gut. They just have so much, belly fat. And then it could also be a thyroid adrenal problem, where people are so stressed out in their life and they're like night owls. They come alive at night. They have no energy in the morning, a true sign of an adrenal exhaustion type.
Mhm.
But the thyroid is always involved. So, and then there's the hormone thyroid point, which is pituitary and hypothalamus, where women tend to get one-sided headaches, on one side, or problems with their cycle, a lot of hormone problems, with irregular cycles, painful fibroid, heavy bleeding, and clotting. And so those are like a thyroid, hormone problem. So if you think about it, when in this model, I believe that it just gives us a lot more answers. And so if you start, balancing blood sugar for the pancreas type and cleaning out the liver on a liver cleanse will help somebody lose more weight in that situation, or a bowel cleanse, and getting the microflora back and the microbiome rebalanced. And then hormone balance, like you can't, if you have estrogen dominance in a woman, there's just no way that she's ever going to lose weight unless you balance that whole mechanism. And so that's kind of the approach that I take, using food as medicine with herbal, and then also the electrical system, and then just teaching our patients, that there's more to this. And even though your thyroid, your doctor said your thyroid is fine, and your eyebrows are falling out, and you're 300 pounds overweight, there's still a problem with your thyroid.
Yeah. Yeah, I think thyroid is one of those ones that is probably most underdiagnosed as far as for being able to assess what's actually going on for a lot of people. So like you said, I often think of thyroid being like the little sibling in the family that gets picked on by all of the other ones. So it's sort of like, if you've got adrenal issues, then that affects thyroid. If you've got sex hormone issues, then that affects thyroid. If you've got blood sugar dysregulation, that affects thyroid. All of these things kind of interact with thyroid, and they can all kind of down regulate it, or cause troubles with it. So it's often why I find weight management is such an individual thing. There's no sort of specifically one diet that works for everybody, or one specific supplement. You really have to try and figure out what's it paired with and what else might be going on, because you often have to do a couple different things at the same time. Like you said, some people do a liver cleanse. They're like, oh my gosh, I dropped 12 pounds, very easily. And it was all this, water weight that was kind of being stuck and not clearing out. And for somebody else, that might not be the exact part of it. Like you said, they might have more estrogen dominance or something along those lines. So
Exactly.
definitely a complicated one. I think why it gets so problem for people to diagnose is this is also something that I find is tricky. When you see most, not all of them, but most conventional medicine doctors will run only a specific couple of tests when they're looking for thyroid. So they might run the TSH, which is coming from up here, and maybe a T4, which is one of the hormones that comes from here. And so from that, they kind of assess whether or not essentially that you need basically Synthroid or a medication to treat it. So one of the big differences for a lot of people to remember is that when you often get conventional blood work, they are looking for a specific diagnosis of a pathology. They're not really looking for a lot of functional imbalances. And most of the people's health concerns, I think, fall within these functional realms that need to be assessed in a broader capacity than what sometimes we see just through conventional lab testing.
That is so true. And I think I see that frustration that you just mentioned, like, oh, I went to my doctor, I got, my TSH is fine. And it's such a good point that, you need to see the whole spectrum. You want a 3D image of the
Mhm.
person, and even with that, as you know, TSH and T4 and T3 and antibodies doesn't always tell you everything, but it gets you a bigger picture. And then instead of this linear thinking, A goes to B, you have strep, therefore you take this antibiotic, it's such a different thinking. And the circular thinking that you do in your practice and that you're talking about is so critical. And that's what really turned me on to alternative medicine, is because I really believed in getting to the root cause of something. And then when it's an emergency, it's great, when you need something resolved
Mhm.
quickly and it's an emergency. I always tell people, if you're bleeding to death, please go to the hospital and call me Monday morning and we'll take care of the rest.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and it makes also treating people more fun because it's a lot more detective work in a lot of ways. And again, it's like a lot of times what happens in conventional medicine is you break it up into very particular specialties where people know a lot about one area, but they're not necessarily learning about the interactions of all of those other areas. And so for certain things that can be really great, but for other things you can't separate the body so much. At some point you have to kind of relook at how your gut impacts so many other things, how certain hormones affect all sorts of other things. So it's like there's this interaction or this integrated part that usually at some point that's where a lot of people really pull their healing together, is by seeing the big picture and how they all intermix.
Yeah, absolutely. I call it the forest and the tree. It's like sometimes you want to stand right next to the tree and look at the bark
Yeah.
with a microscope, and but you also have to keep, the whole perspective of what's going on in the forest. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
exactly.
Yeah.
Now, another thing I wanted to ask you about is one of the other things that I know you talk about sometimes is around anxiety, depression. Um, that's something that is skyrocketed over this past year. I've seen so much of that. And what would be ways to start to address that for people? What sort of wisdom can you pass along as far as for assisting people to overcome anxiety, to overcome depression? There's lots of pieces to this, but what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, so I think that adrenal is always involved, energy, and it's really about flow. So we talked about electricity earlier. So when you think about, something like anxiety is like this improper flow, right? It's like these emotions or, stress and worry. And then depression is like a crash, like you have no motivation. You don't feel like you can get off the couch. So it's like we're kind of stuck, right? And it's kind of like, if we go back for a year ago, going through this COVID and all of these things, we're sort of like dealing with this concept of, start and stop. We're just
Hmm.
constantly stuck, you know. So the best thing you do is, of course, get outside wherever you are and or get moving in some way. Start your day with some sort of, just light exercise. Get outside, get some sun and fresh air, and then learn how to pace your body. Through you can control your emotions through exercise and through proper thinking, and it's all about flow. Steady flow. Like when we feel healthy and happy as a people, we have steady flow of hormones and energy and oxygen. And so you can control your physio by controlling your physiology through exercise, you can really control your mood and your emotions. And you can do the same thing with food as well. So I just encourage people to start their day with exercise and then do interval training where you're doing fast and slow. Start out light. Of course, if you're not healthy, then you start out really light and check with your doctor and all those things. But you really need to exercise is key in controlling your breath and your emotions. And I believe that it's really an adrenal problem. Most of the time, people are just exhausted, stressed out, and their batteries are low, and they're just trying to get moving, and then they run out of power, and then they get exhausted, and then they get stressed out, anxious about it, and then they just fall into depression. So it's just this whole circle, vicious
Hmm.
cycle.
Is there any specific exercise that you usually recommend for people to start with?
Yeah, I
Or
believe in the rebounder. I think the rebounder is like amazing. Like it does so many things, right? It
Mhm.
builds muscle. And so just walking on a rebounder is a good place to start. Jump rope is another one. HIIT training is good with a jump rope. None of those things really cost that much and they're really simple. And then, of course, walking is one of the best exercises, we could ever do. Also, you want to build some muscle strength. I believe that when you get your energy back, you have more muscle, which leads to more energy and more vitality. So something to build muscle, 2 to 3 times a week, weight bearing exercise, as well as aerobic. And then
Mhm.
it's good too, because most of us, so many people work at home that you need to realize that you can't just exercise once a day. And it's so important to break up your exercise, just like eating food. You wouldn't want to eat just one huge meal a day. It would just exhaust you in your body. So it's the same kind of concept. Break it up and do it often.
Mhm. And so, one point that you mentioned that was important there, I think, when people are looking at exercises, as you start to build up, and you feel yourself starting to get a little stronger, then you can move to another layer of exercise. Like you had mentioned, then starting to build up more strength, where you're going to build up more, that's going to work with your metabolism, is going to build up your overall strength. You build up muscle mass. Sometimes I find when people are stressed, sometimes they want to work out kind of hard because they get that almost endorphin release and they feel a little bit better from it, but then they find that it actually then it kind of depletes them again, right? And they kind of go in this back and forth and they crash and then they try and go and they crash. And so I definitely think when you had mentioned walking, I think walking's so underrated. I think there's so many times where just walking to get your body into that parasympathetic dominance, that rest and digest part that most times people need to kind of get out of to begin with anyways. I mean, you kind of have to be in that state for healing to really start to happen anyways. So I love walking, and I know right now that's probably one of my favorite ones at the moment is just walking. And if you can get out in nature, even more beneficial.
Yeah, that is so true. Yeah, walking is key. And even Hippocrates, he said that that was one of his favorite, healing remedies. He felt like walking was like, could heal the body. It was
Hmm.
amazing. Yep.
I remember reading a book, I think it was called Spark. I think that's what it was called. Not certain, but I think it was called Spark. And it was basically looking at exercise and the benefits of exercise in a lot of different ways. And they were looking this on school kids and stuff. And I remember one quote that they were saying was that doing proper exercise or just getting out and doing exercise was kind of like taking a little bit of a antidepressant and a little bit of an anti-anxiety drug and a little bit of this and a little bit of that, a little bit of an anti-ADHD drug, because it kind of gave you the perfect amount of the biochemistry that you needed to function optimally without getting into all the troubles of trying to take certain medications, which are sometimes very difficult to try and figure out exactly what the amount you need. When you do stuff that aligns back with nature, which I think movement aligns with nature, it just has this magical way of giving you the right amounts of what you require.
That is so true. It comes back to balance, doesn't it? Balance and going back to the basics of our birth and, the basics. Yeah, it's so true. Awesome.
Scott, tell us a little bit about, from your opinion, the four pillars of longevity.
Yeah, so I just feel like, when I talk about the four pillars of longevity, it goes along with what we talked about earlier, would be like, movement. We need to, keep moving. And part of that movement that I didn't mention earlier is stretching, like I think stretching, breathing, building, muscle, and just staying active, and like you said, it just brings this complete balance, to the body. And then the other pillar, of course, is food. Food is medicine. We need to keep realizing that it's such a basic principle that's dropped out. We just think fast food, fast medicine, and everything wants to be, everyone wants to do something fast, but we have to take time, to feed our bodies properly and go back to the basics of human health is just, real food, which is hard to find these days, can't go into a store really and find it very easily anymore. Everything's in a package or a can or, it's processed. And then the other part is nutritionally, I believe that we need nutritional support. So, we believe in supplements and supplementing what we're not getting through, whether it be a superfood like spirulina or something, or sprouts, broccoli sprouts to help prevent cancer or, whatever that might be. We can just supplement what we're not getting through our food because we're under a tremendous amount of stress, different types of stress than our forefathers were, and even the sedentary stress, So we really are missing extra nutrients. So we need to fill that in so we don't fall into disease. That's part of prevention. And then I would say the other part would be, detox and therapies. Therapies like you mentioned before, osteopathic type adjustments and acupuncture or whatever it might be, or detox cleansing. Those are that's all essential because we all need detox and cleansing no matter who we are. The older we get as we age, we just have this baggage, which is called body fat, and toxicity that we need to get rid of. It's like we're carrying around the garbage and we never let it go, and it's so important. So those are really these pillars that are essential to staying healthy.
Yeah, well said. And yeah, I think you mentioned it when you were talking about body fat accumulating. A lot of people don't realize that a lot of the toxins that we carry are fat soluble and they get stored in fat. So as we build up more fat over years, we are building up more toxicity. And it's one of the things I love about weight management. When weight management starts to get optimized, there's so many sort of additional things that happen in the body that are so beneficial because you start to naturally clean out a lot of excess toxic burden that you don't really want to be holding on to. So then all of a sudden, so many different things, you find your mood changes, your energy changes, so many different things start to clear up when you're doing that. And I want to talk about supplements for just a sec too. I know a lot of times people think, well, why do you need to take supplements? You just end up peeing them out and this and that. And part of it, I think, too, which is funny, it's like if you're peeing them out, that actually means that you have already absorbed them and they filtered through the liver and now you're peeing them out through the kidneys. So you can't just pee them out and bypass everything. And your body does have a way of kind of pulling what it requires. And, why supplements now? You mentioned a couple of key things. We're under higher amounts of stress. And now I would say back in the original, maybe the big stress would be like you were going to get eaten by a saber-toothed tiger or something. So that's a pretty big stress. But that was usually situational. You'd kind of be in that situation, you'd have your fight or flight reaction, you'd kind of move away from it, and then you go back down, like you see animals literally in the wild where they get chased and then shortly after they're right back down, back into parasympathetics and they're grazing and they're fine. We don't tend to do that. Human beings like to ruminate and lament on different things. So we tend to actually be in I think a lot of times, a stress state. For some people, I think literally it's all day long. We are just ruminating on things and creating stress. And what you need to remember is that stress state is catabolic. It breaks the body down. It uses up higher amounts of nutrients. And so we often then end up having a deficiency that develops from it. And outside of that, it's just not in the soil like it used to be. It's like a lot of times people think about minerals and it's like, well, they're really like, well, I get lots of my iron because I eat my spinach. It's like, well, you only get a lot of iron if that soil was rich in iron and the plant absorbed that iron and now the plant has lots of iron. From that perspective, what are some of the biggest nutrient imbalances that you tend to see in practice?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say vitamin D for sure.
Yeah.
We know that I've noticed a trend, like even like landscapers, think of people that are outside all day long. And I've seen this trend where even though they're exposed to sun all the time, we're here in California, so we get a lot of sun, except, the winter, things change, but they still can be deficient in vitamin D.
Mm-hmm.
So I tell people that, like you said, like there's so many aspects to the nutrients, right? So it has to be in the soil, and then you have to get it in the plant, and then you have to get it into your body, and then your organs have to process it. So there's so many possibilities of something dropping off, leading to deficiency. But vitamin D is number one for sure. And then the minerals, like magnesium is like so deficient and are leading to so much heart disease, and heart attacks is like a spasm. A heart attack is literally like a spasm of the heart. So where does magnesium come from? Well, we used to eat a lot more greens, green foods. And when we had victory gardens in World War II, people grew their own food, for a long time, and then that stopped. And so, now people are getting more back to salads, but it's green foods and nuts and seeds that have this magnesium that we need to relax our muscles. Instead, people are turning to muscle relaxants. And I'm like, well, that's, that can be solved pretty quickly just with magnesium,
Yeah.
And then calcium, of course, we see, we look to, the dairy industry to kind of solve our, our calcium sources. And that isn't necessarily the right, source of calcium or the best source, and so we just have to kind of look for sources as well, and where we're under stress, where we live. The environment can make a big difference, whether or not we get enough sun or not. Excuse me, the stressors of hot or cold environments, Hawaii versus Alaska. So we need more fat, fat's the other thing that people are missing. Good
Mm-hmm.
fats, we don't realize that, so many people don't realize that French fries aren't going to cut it, it will literally slow your brain down, and with the trans fats. So, when people realize, like we do an omega-3 test now
Mm-hmm.
on the blood, which is pretty cool, that we have this technology. And you just, it's kind of shocking for so many people realizing, wow, like I don't have enough omega-3s, and so whether it be wild salmon or, hemp seeds or, chia seeds, we just really don't get enough omega-3s. So that's another really deficient. And then fiber, just natural fiber. I mean, people are going to the store to get all this, pay extra for their fiber. And there's a whole aisle, of fiber, that's being sold at the store for a high dollar, and then yet, we should be getting that in our salads and our, avocados and whatnot. So, so those would be the major nutrient deficiencies. And then vitamin C. I think that whole food vitamin C, not ascorbic acid, but, real vitamin C, through real lemons. We always recommend that people do a lemon every day, at least. It's such a phenomenal source, for our immune system. So those would be the key nutrients I'd say that I see,
Yeah. Yeah, I would say very much the same thing. And that's what's in here is just straight lemon put in hot water. So
Awesome.
it's It's a lot of times we think it has to get complicated. I really do think. I think we think that health has to be really complicated. The brain likes to, it feels like it's got more value if it's more complicated. And I find a lot of times it's really coming back to simplistic and not getting so complicated. It's slowing things down. It's getting the nervous system back on track. And then it's moving just back to fundamentals. So many of the basics that do so much benefit if you can just get them back in alignment. You know, I do the same test a lot of times too, where we'll check an omega-3 to omega-6 ratio. And, you know, you should be tending to be somewhere around like a 3-to-1 relationship of omega-6 to omega-3, somewhere in that with a little variance. And I would say the vast majority of people that I check, they're probably more like a 20-to-1, or a 30-to-1 relationship. I mean, they're way, way out of balance. Way too many omega-6s, not enough omega-3s. And then what I've also found really interesting is that for some people, I found this specifically when I've checked my population that's particularly, say, vegetarian or vegan, because I found a trend where I found a lot of my vegan patients were really out of balance with the omega-3s and 6s, but not all of them. So some of them had the capacity where they could convert things like flax and chia more actively to the EPA and DHA that you want, that's more like a fish oil, and where some didn't have that capacity. So again, it kind of comes back to the individuality of the patient, and it's why no one diet works for everybody. For some people, see, they thrive on something, and then for somebody else that's, I'll see couples where they're both doing the same thing, and I'll check everything, and one person's doing amazing on it and the other person's not. Or taking the exact same amounts of vitamin D, for example, and then you check their blood work and one of them is perfect in the right optimal zone, the other one's still deficient. Like they might need twice as much as the other person. So it's why ultimately I think at some point it's important to do your fundamentals and then periodically get things kind of checked to see if you're actually on track and what you're doing is working for you.
Yeah, that is so true. That is what you just said is golden, getting checked, biofeedback, because otherwise we're just driving blind, and we don't realize what's really going on. But we need that feedback, especially as we age each decade. We need to be checking in to see, getting prepared. My dad used to say, what you do in this decade will determine how you feel in the next decade, and it's really true. It's not like we wake up one day and we're 110. Well, wow, I don't know what happened. Like, that's amazing. It's like, no, you did something that got you there, Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. Scott, what are some of the different technology that you use that kind of blends the Western medicine, Eastern medicine approach? I know you'd mentioned something around a quote unquote Chinese MRI. So maybe you can kind of tell us a little bit about some of the different tools that you use in your clinic to help paint that broader picture of someone's overall health.
Sure. Yeah. So once I realized that the body really is electric, then I sought after ways to help people, because I had more people out of the country and whatnot, different states. And so I came across some scanners. And so this one technology is called the Zyto. And that's actually a scanner out of, started in Germany, that technology did, EAV, machine.
Mm-hmm.
And so to measure the electrical currents, which makes sense, where body's electric, then we can measure it and so quantify it. So that's one tool. And that really helps to understand how the organs are like batteries. And, if they're deficient, they're undercharged, so they're not working very well and they need more charge. Some are overcharged, they're hot and inflamed. And so that's what the graphs look like. And then the patient can understand what they can do, what they can improve on when I tell them why they're having this problem. And then the other scanner is a Nest scanner. And that's out of Australia. That's like 20 years of research and leads to infusiticals, which are like homeopathic like remedies that are very stable, much more stable than homeopathics. And it's just pretty amazing. So when you put these tools together along with, I read blood work, of course, and, send out for blood work as well. But it just gives a more complete picture. Once again, that circular thinking versus just linear. And so I get, patients all the time, and I'm sure you do too, where people say, yeah, I've already done the MRI and I did the blood work and I have no problems. They say I'm not allergic to wheat but it's so strange. Like I break out in hives when I eat a piece of wheat bread and I still don't feel, I feel sick, and I'm still overweight. So I'm looking for answers, and so this really gives people another perspective. It's very visual, and we can do it anywhere in any country. Just it's so great. We can send out these cradles to somebody's home, and then all they need is a computer, and then we fire it up, and then we do a consult, and then we determine what they need, and we send them the supplements and make the lifestyle changes that are necessary.
Nice. I was wondering if you can explain that in a little bit more detail too, around for people that might not understand how that works, but as far as being able to do assessments both local as well as non-local.
Sure. So if they're in person, in front of me, I have the computer, and then we run the scanner. So they just put their hand on the scanner, so it just looks like a glove that's reading the electrical. And the way I describe it is, the hand is actually, in the Korean acupuncture theory, is its own electrical system. It represents the whole body, and the Russians have done something similar. And so then it's just reading those electrical currents, galvanic resistance, like a lie detector test, or we send the cradles in the mail to them, and then they would do it in their home. They plug it in their computer, and then we share the software. And the software is really the reading, where we can I can run the scan in the office if they're out of the office, and then I ask questions to the body. Do you have liver problems? Where's the inflammation? Do you have parasites? And then, much like a blood work test to an MD, where it can ask specific questions, we can do the same electrically, and we can ask hundreds of questions quickly. Within 10, 15 minutes, we can ask hundreds of questions at a more affordable rate, versus your MD at Kaiser would probably say, I'm sorry, we can't run hundreds of tests here. That would be too expensive.
Yeah. And what's also helpful for people to understand too is when you're starting to look at assessing the body, there's almost these different ways to do it. And so when you look at something like, blood tests and urine tests, a lot of times you're looking at very much the physical body piece of things. And how I tend to, and you can tell me if this is similar to how you think about it too, Scott, but when I think about it, you think of the body, there's these different layers of health, and you can assess them in different ways. So there's a physical layer, and there's certain ways that we assess the physical layer. And then there's a vital body layer, and there's certain ways that we assess the vital body and the mental body and the archetype and the spirit body. And things that are higher up or more abstract tend to come down like a pyramid and affect the stuff that is more concrete. So it's always great to be able to look at things like blood and urine and stool and these sort of physical markers for health. But it's also really important to see some of the more subtle energy ways of assessing what else might be going on as well. And a lot of times these are the things that don't always show up yet at that physical body. I mean, to me, this is also where it's really important for prevention, because you're seeing sort of a direction that you're maybe moving in that you can nip in the bud before it actually becomes a problem that now we actually see in blood work or in the physical body.
Yeah, that's a really great point that you bring up. I would liken that idea to the 4 layers of blood layers in Chinese medicine. And the concept is, they talk about the 4 layers. And so the top layer would be like the skin, And so the concept is that some things are just on the surface, and then it goes down to the sinews, a little bit deeper, maybe the fascia, and then it gets a little deeper. And then finally, the blood level is the deepest level. So if you liken that to the parallel of Western medicine, the problem is, people come in after they've been diagnosed with cancer, They're like, well, why didn't you catch this? I don't understand why all of a sudden I get my checkups every year, and now you're telling me I'm sick. Like this is really bad. And, well, it's because, if you don't catch the look at the higher level, like you said, like a pyramid, or then you'll never catch it, until it finally gets to the blood level. And then it's serious, right? Then it's reached the deepest level of the body is the blood level. And then, so if you're just waiting for something to, like sediment in a fish tank, drop to the bottom, then it's really not the best approach to prevention, because you're always going to be waiting for the emergency, And so that's why some of these other testing techniques, besides blood work and MRIs and X-rays, are just another viewpoint that are more subtle, more biofeedback, and can detect, subtle changes And then once you get it early, like you said, nip it early. It's just so much easier to prevent a forest fire than put one out. I mean, Smokey the Bear taught us that, right?
Yeah, true enough, for sure. So, yeah, I think that's a really important point, though. I think that being able to assess the direction you're moving in years before it ever becomes a problem I really think that's part of the future of medicine. And the other thing I feel like is shifting more and more because technology is getting more accurate too. And I also think human consciousness is shifting to a point where we can even start to explore these things in a different way. But we've kind of been traditionally very biochemical basis, and that's where everything kind of looked. And I think where the transition is moving now is as we start to think about things more in the terms of vibration, frequency, light, intent. These things actually have a very physical reality to them and a physical effect on the body. And so as we get better and better with being able to assess things in those realms, I think it's opening up amazing doors on what we're going to be able to do with health.
Absolutely. Yeah. What you just said was key about frequency. So much of the tools we use we do a lot of light therapy and
Mhm.
frequency based, energy medicine. And so, yeah, that's really where it's at because for the future, because you pick up on things with biofeedback earlier than you would see them otherwise. And then, the biggest thing that, I'd ask, to think about for the listeners is, how long does it take to develop a serious disease? And most people don't realize that we're talking about 15 to 20 years on average. And so that's the problem is that if you're looking at a detection device that looks for a mass or, breast cancer or something like that, then you're looking at, okay, we're just going to wait for this to arrive. And then it takes, billions of cells to finally create a tumor. And so it's like, but if we can catch this energy that's clustering, called stagnation in Asian medicine,
Mhm.
when you catch what would be the thoughts, that we have that are negative relationships or negative emotions, eventually they solidify into something bad, and they block energy flow in the body. So it's really where it's at is frequency and energy flow. Absolutely. So it goes back to the battery and the circuits.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. And for people out there, when you know something still does not feel right, and you are told by your healthcare practitioner that everything looks normal, but you don't feel normal, that's a good sign to keep looking deeper. So they haven't looked at everything. I can guarantee you everything has not ever looked at. And there's lots of different layers to it. So if you know something doesn't feel right inside you, you got to work with somebody that's going to be able to kind of pull those different pieces together and help you find them. Now, Scott,
Absolutely.
before we wrap things up, is there anything that we missed? Anything else that you would like to share with the listeners before we direct them to where they can learn more about your work?
Yeah, I would just say the biggest thing that I would say is keep thinking, keep an open mind, be adaptable, and keep looking for answers, like you said, and don't accept, this, if you feel a pain or discomfort or things aren't right, you don't know how to describe it even, just keep looking for answers and look for somebody that can give you a different viewpoint. And because if you let things go, they'll just get worse. But if you take care of something the right way and you find balance back in your body, then they'll only get better. And so that's the key is to keep thinking, keep open, and get a second opinion.
Yeah. Don't just chalk everything up to aging. Aging gets such a bad rap, but I've seen people decrease their biological, or I should say their physiological age as they actually get older. So even if they come in at 30, they might have more of a biological age of 30, but their physiological age might actually look like they're more like 50. But after they kind of go through things, they start to get back into even their 20s again. So it's so important to kind of not just chalk everything up to, oh, these creaky joints and this and that. There's definitely a certain degree of wear and tear, but a lot of times I think aging really is just a result of having things out of balance for a longer period of time that's now creating more wear and tear. So if you can start to reverse that process to some point, it's dramatic how much of a difference you can make when you get things on track.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Scott, where can people learn more about the work you're doing? Where's the best place to send them?
Yeah, so one source is our website. So Sommers, Sommers, summersholistic.health.com. And then what else, Avery, the other? Life-Changing Health Tips with Scott Sommer. That's our podcast.
Oh, awesome. So
On
what we'll
Spot-
do,
Mhm.
sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, that's on Spotify and also Apple.
Okay. What we'll do is we'll get the links for those and we'll put them in the show notes so you guys can go and check out Scott's work. You got a great website. You got lots of information on there. I recommend people go check it out and see. And if that appeals, then I think it's pretty easy to do both in-person consults as well as doing virtual consults with you too. So
Absolutely.
wonderful, Scott. Absolute pleasure. Thanks so much for your time. I really enjoyed having that conversation.
Likewise, Jason, it's really been awesome. Thank you.
Well, that was awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to invest in your health and well-being. Since this podcast is brand new, reviews and subscribers are so vital for us to get off the ground and share this really important information. So if you found this information valuable, please post a review and subscribe to the podcast so you'll get our newest episodes. Also, if you know of someone who would benefit from this, please share it with them. You can also find us on Instagram at #InspireHealthPodcast. If you have a question that you'd like to be addressed, direct message me on Instagram or leave a comment on one of my posts. I would love to hear from you. And you can grab our show notes and free resources for each episode at inspirehealthpodcast.com. So be sure to go online and check it out.